By late 2012, early 2013, the existence of the 8th gen consoles was fairly well established. Flashy titles like Far Cry 3 barely ran on 7th gen platforms, and rumor mills were rife with insider reports about projects Durango and Orbis, well underway at Microsoft and Sony respectively. The overuse of teraflops as a point of comparison in the gaming media can be traced back to those early reports about Orbis on PS4 using 1.84 teraflop GPUs compared to Durango's or Xbox One's lesser 1.3 teraflop parts. Peak compute power isn't a great way to compare the gaming performance of GPUs, but that's a whole other story. In any case, Sony's announcement of the PS4 at a special event in New York was more or less expected. What was surprising was the stunning 8th gen gameplay and engine footage on display. Many iconic early PS4 titles were showcased at the demo and shortly thereafter. The generational leap was more than evident. Whether we're talking about Knack's cartoon visuals comparing favorably with early Pixar titles, infamous Second Son's incredible particle effects, or Driveclub introducing us to the wonders of dynamic global illumination. But before we go in depth with these visually spectacular launch titles, it makes sense to spend some time on the hardware transition from PS3 to PS4 that made them possible. The move away from the PS3's Cell RSX combo to a more normal x86-based platform presented both new opportunities and new constraints. The PS3 had a powerful multi-core processor, the Cell, paired with the RSX, a relatively weak GPU based on NVIDIA's G70 core, which was dated even at the time of launch. If the rumors are to be believed, Ken Kutaragi initially didn't even want the PS3 to have a GPU. He was convinced that Cell could handle rendering by itself. Feedback from first-party developers, particularly Naughty Dog, resulted in the last-minute inclusion of the RSX. The situation with the PS4 was inverted. It featured a weak Jaguar-based CPU that AMD originally envisioned powering tablets, paired with a GPU that's roughly on par with the HD 7870, an upper mid-range 2012 part. The Cell processor and the Xbox 360's Xenos can take a good part of the blame for the open world genre that's gradually kept creeping into games, largely because the 7th gen's powerful CPUs made possible the kind of lifelike world simulation on display in Rockstar's finest, GTA 5. Though newer by nearly a decade, eons in the tech space, the PS4's Jaguar-based processor isn't meaningfully more powerful than Cell, which actually outperforms it in certain use cases. A consequence of this CPU-side hardware stagnation is that while graphics in open-world titles have improved noticeably, world simulation in 8th gen titles isn't drastically more complex than it was possible during the last gen. To put it another way, many PS4 games look better than their PS3 predecessors. Most still play the same. In the few cases where developers try to push things forward, as with the ill-fated Assassin's Creed Unity, performance suffered for the worse. This is not to say that Sony and developers haven't found ways to compensate for the PS4's mismatched hardware vis-a-vis the PS3. For starters, the API is enhanced. The PS3's libgcm API already offers developers low-level access, critical to getting games running well on the PS3's SPUs. With the PS4, while concern is less about having a difficult-to-program-for processor as it is about having a patently weak processor, the solution is much the same. libgnm, the PS4's API, is an updated version of libgcm, which gives developers enhanced low-level access to the PS4's hardware and reduces the number of draw calls from the CPU, reducing the degree to which the Jaguar CPU bottlenecks the graphics hardware. In terms of efficiency, it offers even lower-level access than Vulkan. The Xbox One, on the other hand, shipped with DX11, part of the reason why multiplats, at least in early days, did so much worse on the Xbox One than on PS4. Another way developers worked around the PS4's weak CPU was with GPGPU, offloading world-building physics and AI functions to the GPU. This was exactly the opposite of the situation on PS3, where graphics functions were often offloaded to Cell to compensate for the weak RSX. Apart from the massive jump in GPU capabilities, by far the largest change came in terms of the PS4's massive, for the time, 8GB of GDDR5 memory. The PS3's split memory architecture meant that the RSX only had access to 256MB of VRAM. As a result, smaller frame buffer sizes were often used, meaning lower sub-native resolutions in many cases. The PS4's 8GB memory pool is what allows it to run games at a crisp native 1080p, a hallmark of many PS4 exclusives that set apart PS4 launch titles from everything else in the console space at the time. And what about those titles? What kind of tech did they utilize to set them apart? Well, of all the titles on display at the February 20th announcement, Driveclub, by far, featured the most jaw-dropping visuals. While plenty of games this gen have implemented static global illumination to good effect, Driveclub is among a handful to implement dynamic GI with time-of-day changes. Global GI, alongside liberal use of screen space reflections, resulted in the game featuring gorgeous lighting and some of the best rain effects seen to this day. Every platform has its flagship eye-candy shooter. Xbox has the Halo series, and PlayStation has Killzone. The original Killzone on the PS2 had fantastic visuals, though it was hampered by terrible performance. Killzone 2 and 3 were, despite the fantastical excess of that Killzone 2 target render, better looking shooters than just about anything on the Xbox 360, barring Halo 4. Killzone Shadowfall followed in that tradition. Despite being a launch title, not a mid-gen showcase, Shadowfall remains a graphical powerhouse on PS4. It was one of the very first games to fully utilize physically based rendering, a technique that allows in-game materials to accurately reflect light just like their real-life counterparts. PBR has since become a hallmark feature of 8th gen, much like bloom lighting was for the 7th gen. During development, Killzone Shadowfall also utilized an entirely new workflow which allowed for procedurally generated animations, vastly more varied than before, and audio solutions called Matter, Material-Dependent Early Reflections, which accurately simulated sound waves reflecting off various materials. Infamous Second Son, which actually made the PS4 launch window, showcased visuals which were leaps and bounds above its PS3 predecessors. What was most noticeable with Second Son was its particle rendering system. While also utilizing PBR and screen space reflections, what truly set Second Son apart was how its engine was able to handle thousands of individually lit particles simultaneously. Together with fully shadowed fog and alpha effects, Infamous's hallmark superpower-charged urban demolition was elevated to new heights. The Order 1886 was developed by Ready at Dawn, and judging by their past work, they clearly know how to squeeze every drop out of a Sony platform, and nowhere is this more evident than in the Order 1886. Tapping deep into the PS4's GPU resources, Ready at Dawn aimed to create what is described as a filmic experience with the Order 1886, complete with an ultra-wide 2.4:1 aspect ratio. The game's photorealistic visuals do justice to its filmic aspirations. It remains one of the best-looking titles on console, thanks in large part to its excellent use of physically based rendering. Though Quantic Dream's recently released Detroit Become Human features somewhat more detailed characters, but we'll be discussing that in part 3 of this feature. The game's custom Forward Plus renderer is the best of both worlds. Multiple dynamic light sources, a la deferred rendering, and a 4x MSAA pass for CGI approximating anti-aliasing. Thanks to superior hardware, a better API compared to the competition, and first-party studios dedicated to squeezing every drop of performance from it, the PS4 had a heady launch period with one graphical showcase after another. It's no surprise then that globally it remains the fastest-selling console of all time. Stay tuned for the third part of the series where we look at PS4 exclusives from mid-gen through the Pro era.
And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.